This is Wes Overton, and we're going to review the similarities and differences from the previous Algebra I course of study and the new 2019-2020 Algebra I with Probability course of study. So one thing as we go through the previous course of study that jumps out is the elimination of Algebra 1A and Algebra 1B. So in the new course of study, that course cannot be separated into two courses. It will just be one course. And as we go through this, I'm just going to highlight some of the major changes. Some of the more in-depth changes will be covered during the trainings for each training day in the 9 weeks that we'll do each training day. So these are just going to be some of the major highlights. So Standard 3 from the previous course of study has been removed. Standards 4, 5, and 6 have also been removed. Standard 11 has been taken out for our new course of study. Standard 15 has been moved to geometry. And like I said, we're just going to go over the major changes on each page, not any major changes there. One thing a lot of people did not realize in the previous course of study was this asterisk right there. And what that asterisk meant was that this standard was part of the mathematical modeling cycle. Well, one thing they have done is they have removed that asterisk, and there is a standard on the mathematical modeling cycle. We will get to that when we look at the new course of study. Now, another thing with the previous course of study that did cause some confusion was you would see a standard here that would have like graph square root, cube root, piecewise, but then you look up here in italics is where you really had to look to find out you were just doing linear, exponential, quadratic, absolute value, step, and awareness of piecewise defined. So that did not include square root or cube root. So that was some kind of confusion when you read through this standard, because this same standard might have been in Algebra 2 or pre-calculus, exact same wording. The only difference might have been the italics. Well, that new course of study has eliminated a lot of that confusion. They took some steps, which we'll go over once we look at the new course of study, to eliminate that confusion. So as we continue on, no major changes on that page. And then the statistics and probability, there was a lot of major changes. So one thing, 41, 42, and 43, those all went to geometry. Standard 44 got expanded on, so we take a deeper dive into two categorical variables in our new course of study. Standards 45 and 46, they went to geometry, which now will be before Algebra 1. In Standard 47, like in the previous course, there was this only one standard that dealt with conditional probability and independence. So you'll see in the new course of study, we go a lot more in depth into conditional probability and independence. So this takes us to our new current course of study. And so we're going to look at the same thing, kind of go through it page by page, look at some changes. So one big change is the introduction of imaginary numbers, which is Standard 3. So that's something new this year. All right. Another thing that removed some confusion was when we factor quadratic expressions and use completing the square to write an expression in vertex form, we are just doing it with a leading coefficient of 1. So that is the minimum standard. You could take it above that if you wanted, but to meet this Alabama course of study standard, we just need a leading coefficient of 1 when we complete the square and when we factor quadratic expressions. Standard 8 is a new standard to Algebra 1 with probability, talking about extraneous solutions. Standard 10 with linear systems, one, it introduced linear combinations formally, building on substitution, which they learned in 8th grade, solving by graphing, which they learned in 8th grade. And we also have, which is more efficient method based on the system we have. Now, when we look at standards 11, 12, and 13, I highlighted those just to show you the difference where it's a lot more clear what we're going to do in Algebra I with probability and where those boundaries are. So here it clearly says, what type of functions we're going to do. So we have linear functions, quadratic, exponential, and absolute value. So this same standard could be in Algebra II or pre-calculus, but this bold would be different for more advanced functions in the later courses. Standard 17 deals with combining different types of functions and the use of function composition. So that is also a new standard this year. This page, there's not any, major changes. There might be a few minor changes on words, but no major changes. This page with these standards, same thing. Few minor changes, nothing major. And then we get to the page that has the probability and stats, and then the mathematical modeling. So now, standard 31 talks about using the mathematical modeling cycle. So previously you had to look for standards with an asterisk, and it was kind of like a secret code, but now that's clearly defined. We're using that mathematical modeling cycle, and there's a page or two on that in the back of this course of study, but it talks about using the mathematical modeling cycle with linear, quadratic, exponential, absolute value, and linear piecewise functions. And then the statistics and probability is where we see a big difference. One, we take a lot deeper dive into two categorical variables, so you will see that on 32, 34, and 35. 33, they're designing and carrying out an investigation to see if there's an association between two categorical variables. And then we go to some of the probability. Okay, we have one more statistics standard. We have Simpson's paradox, which is new. And then in the probability, we take a lot deeper dive into independence and conditional probabilities. So previously, we just had one standard. Now we have 37, 38, 39, 40, and 41. So those are a couple of the major changes. We will go over those more each day when we look at each 9 weeks.